Hello, all my history students. This video is going to be a little different than your normal weekly lessons. I wanted to share with you a story of what it was like to live in quarantine as children during the polio outbreak in the 50s. First, I'm going to explain what polio was and how it relates to what we're going through now. And then I'm going to read to you a first person account of what it was like to live during that time as a child. So I thought this would be interesting for you guys to kind of see how other people dealt with being quarantined as well about 70 years ago and how it's different for us today. So polio was known as the epidemic that preyed on children. Do you want to spend the rest of your life with an iron lung? Children heard these words during polio outbreaks when they begged to play outside. In the late spring of 1949, the local newspaper in San Angelo, Texas, reported that a child had been rushed to the hospital with a fever, aching joints, and mild paralysis of the legs, the telltale signs of polio. A city of 50,000 dotted with oil rigs and cattle ranches, San Angelo was no stranger to the disease. Each year following World War II, polio would arrive like clockwork as summer approached, striking down a child or two before burning itself out. Within days that spring, however, the hospital's ICU was overflowing with children, most in critical condition, and mild concern turned to panic. Prayer proved insufficient. For the first time in anyone's memory, social distancing took hold. The city council voted to close theaters, bars, bowling alleys, and the municipal swimming pool. Tanker trucks sprayed DDT, singling out the open pit toilets on the other sides of town. Tourist traffic disappeared. The locals stopped handling money, and some refused to speak on the telephone, believing that germs traveled through the transmission lines. Known for its neighborliness, San Angelo quickly ditched the niceties that it once took for granted. We got to the point that nobody could comprehend, a pediatrician recalled, when people would not even shake hands. Although polio is only a memory in the United States today, the current pandemic is stirring up feelings similar to when this insidious crippler terrified a nation. Like the Great Influenza of 1918, polio offers historical perspective. Both the polio virus and the coronavirus rely on silent carriers, those showing no immediate symptoms, to spread the disease, inciting a fearful sense of uncertainty. Both target specific, if dramatically different age groups. COVID seems especially lethal for the elderly, while polio was lethal for the young. In San Angelo, some businesses remained open, simply hoping to survive. The local cleaning establishment vowed to disinfect its equipment before each pressing and wash. The Sherwin-Williams Paint and Hardware Company promised its loyal customers toxic bug spray free of charge. Agents hawked special polio insurance, while the town chiropractor boasted that he could prevent the disease by keeping your child's body correctly adjusted. The epidemic lasted until early fall, when the cool winds of October helped extinguish its destructive reach. In 1949, the United States reported about 40,000 polio cases, one for every 3,775 people. San Angelo, meanwhile, reported 420 cases, one for every 124 people. 84 of the city's children would be permanently paralyzed, and 28 would die. The San Angelo polio outbreak would stack up percentage-wise as one of the most destructive ever recorded anywhere in the world. Numbers aside, its patterns were all too familiar. The epidemic preyed on children, doing its worst damage in the summer months. It appeared to hit the tidy, stable neighborhoods of San Angelo far harder than those marked by poverty and squalor. Much remains unknown about polio because the development of two effective vaccines in the 1950s and early 60s made further research not needed. But why did it strike almost exclusively in warm weather? Why did most of its victims appear to come from middle-class surroundings? And why was epidemic polio primarily a disease of the 20th century that struck the world's more developed nations, especially in the United States? So before modern times, mostly disease spread in third world countries or countries where there's a lot of poverty because disease spreads quicker through unhygienic means. Okay, if you live in a first world country like the United States or in Europe, we are a very hygienic culture. Okay, we're washing our hands, we're clean. Okay, so it helps halt the spread of disease. There are no certain answers. Some believe that polio, a virus transmitted primarily through oral contact, not airborne, as with the coronavirus, is uniquely suited to warm weather transmission. Others see polio's dramatic spread in the 1940s and 50s as in terms of cleanliness. As Americans grew more germ conscious and sanitary minded, there was less chance that they would encounter poliovirus very early in life. When the disease is milder and maternal antibodies provide temporary protection. Do you want to spend the rest of your life with an iron lung? Children heard these words when they begged to go swimming or play outside, when they jumped through a puddle or licked a friend's ice cream cone, when they refused to take a nap or balked at the daily home polio test, where children were asked to put their chin to their chest and touch your toes. So that was a way to stretch. And if you couldn't do that, it would signify that you had polio because it would less movement in your extremities. Hitting with full force at the very height of the baby boom era, at a time of unprecedented prosperity and population growth, polio became the crack in the middle class picture window, a summer plague dotted with visible reminders, wheelchairs, crutches, leg braces, breathing devices. All right, so I want to talk about how it was like for people, and especially children back then during the polio virus. So I'm going to talk about a first-person account from Glenn and Nancy Grundman growing up in Milwaukee and what they had to deal with. It's very similar to what we're dealing with now. Growing up in Milwaukee, Glenn and Nancy Grundman were quarantined as children during the polio epidemic, when they were most susceptible to the crippling virus. Now, as seniors, they're once again part of an at-risk group and quarantined due to COVID-19. The Grundmans, who are now married and longtime residents of Kokomo, grew up on different sides of Milwaukee as children. Though they didn't know each other during the city's 6-week polio quarantine during the summer of 1944 that kept thousands of children home, they had very similar experiences. It was very, very scary for everybody, including the children in those days, because almost everybody knew someone who had polio, and most children ended up either being crippled or paralyzed from it, said Nancy, who was 8 years old during the quarantine. Even as a child, you were aware of that, and it scared us. The polio epidemic reached its heights from the 1940s to the 1950s before a vaccine came out, and it peaked during the summer months, killing an average of 2,000 people annually during those years. Many of those who didn't die were treated using an iron lung, a device similar to a ventilator that the Grundmans said caused even more fear. Patients were encased in the metal chamber for months, years, or for life. It was attached to 2 vacuum devices and worked by changing the pressure inside the machine to expand and contract the chest cavity to fill with air. So it kind of works as another lung if yours isn't working properly. Your whole body was in it except for the head, and it was considered at that time a respirator of sorts. But that was a big deterrent, and it was absolutely scary for children. In Milwaukee County in 1944, at least 11 children died from polio, prompting Milwaukee to initiate a polio quarantine late that summer. During August and September, children ages 12 and under were regulated to their homes and backyards. Houses in the city, Nancy said, were close together, around 6 feet apart, and backyards were separated with metal chain link fences that, in effect, separated the children. There were strict orders from parents for children not to hang on the fences or touch them while talking to children in neighboring yards. We could not go close to the fence, said Nancy, and we obeyed our parents. Nancy said she was fortunate in that she had a swing set and slide in her backyard, that she and her younger brother would play on. She had a sister who